Picture this scenario, because I guarantee it's playing out in your head right now. Maybe even as you're watching this video. You're lying in bed at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, and that familiar knot of anxiety is twisting in your stomach. You just checked your savings account on your phone. The balance says $8,347. You've been building this emergency fund for 2 years. 2 years of skipping the vacation, driving the old car, saying no to dinners with friends. All because every financial guru on the internet screamed at you that you need 3 to 6 months of expenses saved before you do anything else. And you believe them. You've been a good soldier. You've been disciplined. But here's what's keeping you awake. That $8,347 is sitting in a savings account earning 0.5% interest, while inflation is running at 3.2%. Mathematically, your emergency fund is losing $225 of purchasing power every single year. You are working overtime, sacrificing your lifestyle, hoarding cash in a vault that is slowly burning. And you were told this is financial responsibility. But what if I told you that the emergency fund, as it's traditionally taught, is not protecting you, it's trapping you? It's a psychological cage that keeps the middle class perpetually broke, while the wealthy play a completely different game with their cash. My name is Grayson Cole, and I spend way too much time thinking about why the financial advice that sounds the most responsible is often the advice that destroys the most wealth. If you're someone who's been dutifully building an emergency fund while watching your net worth stagnate, or if you're paralyzed from investing because you're still trying to hit that magic 6-month number, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Because today, we aren't talking about budgeting apps or side hustles. We're talking about why the emergency fund doctrine is a poverty trap disguised as wisdom, how it's designed to keep your capital frozen while banks profit from your fear, and what the top 10% actually do with their cash reserves that nobody tells you about. We're going to expose the hidden cost of hoarding cash, calculate the wealth destruction happening in your checking account right now, and show you the tactical framework that lets you have protection without sacrificing compound growth. Let that sink in. Here's the fundamental lie embedded in mainstream personal finance advice. You are told that before you invest a single dollar, before you even think about building wealth, you must have 3 to 6 months of expenses sitting in a savings account. Dave Ramsey says it. Susie Orman says it. Every financial literacy website parrots the same script. Save $10,000, $15,000, maybe even $25,000 depending on your expenses, and keep it liquid, keep it safe, keep it in cash. This sounds reasonable, it sounds responsible, but it's based on a worldview from 1985, when savings accounts paid 8% interest, and you could actually earn a return on safety. That world is gone. Today, the average savings account in America pays 0.46% annual interest. Some of the big banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, they pay 0.01%, 1 penny per $100 per year. Meanwhile, inflation, the real cost of living increase that you feel at the grocery store and the gas pump, is eroding your purchasing power by 3 to 4% annually. When you do the math, your emergency fund is not preserving wealth, it is destroying it. You are paying a 3% annual tax just to feel safe. Let's make this concrete with a real human being. Let's call him Marcus. Marcus is 32 years old. He makes $78,000 a year working in project management. He's single, lives in a 1-bedroom apartment, and his monthly expenses are about $4,200. Rent, utilities, car payment, insurance, groceries, the works. Financial advice tells Marcus he needs 6 months of expenses saved. 6 times $4,200 is $25,200. Marcus has been grinding for 3 years to build this fund. He finally hits $25,000 sitting in his Ally savings account, earning 4.35% if he's lucky. He thinks he's done the responsible thing. He thinks he's protected. But let's run the brutal calculation. At 4.35% interest, Marcus earns $1,087.50 per year on that $25,000. After taxes, because yes, that interest is taxed as ordinary income at his 22% bracket, he keeps $848. Meanwhile, inflation at 3.2% eats $800 of purchasing power annually. His net real return is $48 per year. Marcus locked up $25,000 of capital for 3 years to earn $48 annually. Let that sink in. But here's where it gets really dark. If Marcus had taken that same $25,000 and invested it in the S&P 500, which historically returns 10% annually, he would have earned $2,500 in the first year. Over a 10-year period, that $25,000 compounds to $64,843. The emergency fund strategy cost Marcus $39,843 in lost wealth over a decade. He didn't save $25,000. He destroyed $40,000 of his future retirement. This is the opportunity cost that nobody talks about at dinner parties. This is the invisible wealth transfer from your pocket to the void. The emergency fund doctrine is based on fear. It is based on the assumption that catastrophe is imminent and liquidity is the only defense. But let's actually look at the data, because fear without data is just paranoia. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Household Economics, only 36% of Americans could cover a $400 emergency expense without borrowing. That stat gets thrown around constantly to justify the emergency fund obsession. But let's dig deeper. What counts as an emergency? The most common financial emergencies are car repairs, medical bills, and temporary job loss. The average unexpected car repair is $500 to $1,200. The average emergency room visit with insurance is $150 to $3,000, depending on what happened. These are real costs, but they aren't $25,000 costs. They're $1,000 to $3,000 costs. If you have $25,000 sitting idle to cover a $1,200 car repair, you are massively overinsured. You're holding a nuclear weapon to kill a mosquito. And here's the part that will make you angry. The banks and the financial institutions love the emergency fund advice. They love it. Why? Because your $25,000 sitting in their savings account, paying you 0.46%, is being lent out by them at 7% for auto loans, 18% for credit cards, and 6.5% for mortgages. They are taking your cash, which you deposited out of fear, and they are arbitraging a 6 to 17% profit margin on your capital while you earn pennies. You are funding their profit machine. You are the warehouse for cheap inventory. They are strip mining your potential wealth and giving you a gold star for being responsible. Now you might be thinking, okay, Gray, but what about job loss? What if I get laid off and I can't pay rent? And look, I hear you. Job loss is a legitimate fear. But let's actually run the numbers on this scenario, because the math might surprise you. The average unemployment duration in the US is currently 19.4 weeks, roughly 4.5 months. If you lose your job, you qualify for unemployment benefits, which replace about 40 to 50% of your previous income, depending on your state. So, if Marcus was making $78,000 a year, that's $6,500 per month, gross. His unemployment check is approximately $2,600 to $3,250 per month. His expenses are $4,200. The gap he needs to cover out of pocket is $950 to $1,600 per month. Over 4.5 months, that's $4,275 to $7,200, not $25,000. Marcus needs $7,200 of liquid reserves to survive an average duration job loss, not $25,000. By holding $25,000 in cash, he is over-allocating capital by 350%. That excess $17,800 should be working for him, compounding, growing, building his future. Instead, it's sitting in a vault earning nothing. This is financial malpractice disguised as prudence. And here's the truly insane part. The 6-month emergency fund rule assumes you do absolutely nothing for 6 months if you lose your job. It assumes you don't take a gig job, you don't do Uber, you don't consult, you don't sell anything. You just sit on the couch for 180 days waiting for the perfect job offer. That's not how humans operate. According to labor statistics, 73% of unemployed people are back in some form of income-generating work within 3 months, even if it's part-time or contract work. The idea that you need 6 months of full expenses saved assumes total passivity, and that's not realistic. It's worst-case scenario planning for a scenario that statistically almost never happens. Let's talk about the psychology of the emergency fund, because this is where the trap really locks shut. The emergency fund gives you a false sense of security. It's a psychological crutch that makes you feel like you've arrived, like you're financially stable, when in reality, you're standing still. You hit that 20,000 or 25,000 number, and your brain says, okay, I'm done. I'm safe now. But you're not safe. You're exposed to inflation. You're exposed to opportunity cost. And most dangerously, you've trained yourself to hoard cash instead of deploy capital. This is called the scarcity mindset trap. Research in behavioral economics shows that once people build a large cash cushion, they become irrationally risk-averse. They stop investing because they don't want to see that balance go down. They've psychologically anchored to the number. They check their savings account every day and feel good when it goes up by $50, not realizing that $50 is meaningless in the context of building real wealth. The emergency fund becomes an end goal instead of a tool. And here's the kicker. The bigger your emergency fund, the more emergencies you will find. This is called Parkinson's law applied to finances. You have $30,000 saved. Suddenly, the washing machine breaks, and instead of fixing it for $200, you decide it's an emergency and you buy a new $1,200 washing machine because, hey, you have the emergency fund. You're using your safety net as a spending justification. The emergency fund doesn't prevent emergencies. It redefines everything as an emergency. Now here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a little enraging. The wealthy do not follow the emergency fund rule. They don't have $50,000 sitting in a checking account. They have credit. They have liquidity through access, not hoarding. Let me explain the difference because this is the paradigm shift that changes everything. Liquidity and cash are not the same thing. Liquidity is the ability to access money quickly. Cash is having money sitting idle. The wealthy maintain liquidity through home equity lines of credit, securities-backed lines of credit, and business credit lines. If they need $20,000 for an emergency, they pull it from a HELOC at 7% interest or a securities-backed line at 5%. They solve the emergency and then they pay it back over time. Meanwhile, their capital, the money that would have been sitting in savings, is invested and earning 10% in the market. They're arbitraging the spread. They're paying 5 to 7% to borrow during an emergency, while their investments earn 10%. They're net positive during a crisis. The middle class is taught to hoard cash and earn 0.5%. The wealthy are taught to leverage liquidity and stay invested. This is the game, and nobody tells you this in high school economics class. Let me break down the specific mechanics of how this works because I want you to see the tactical blueprint. Let's say you're 35 years old. You have $20,000 that financial advice tells you to keep in savings. Here's the alternative strategy. You take $15,000 of that $20,000 and you put it in a low-cost index fund, VTSAX, VOO, something that tracks the S&P 500. You keep $5,000 in a high-yield savings account as a small buffer for the truly immediate expenses, the $1,200 car repair or the $800 emergency vet bill. Then, you open a securities-backed line of credit with a brokerage like Fidelity or Schwab. This is a loan against your brokerage account. They'll lend you up to 50 to 70% of your account value at interest rates typically between 5 and 8%. You don't touch this line unless a real emergency happens. But if it does, if you lose your job or you have a $10,000 medical bill, you borrow against your investments. You solve the emergency and then you pay the line back over 6 to 12 months. Meanwhile, your $15,000 stays invested, continues compounding, and over 10 years grows to $38,906 at 10% annual returns. Compare that to the traditional approach where all $20,000 sits in savings, earning 0.5%, and after 10 years, you have $21,024. The liquidity strategy nets you $17,882 more over a decade. You had the same protection. You could access money in an emergency, but you didn't sacrifice growth to get it. This is the hidden arbitrage that separates the wealthy from the stuck. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Grayson, that sounds great, but what if the market crashes right when I lose my job? What if my $15,000 investment drops to $9,000 and I need to borrow against it? This is the crash timing fear, and it's valid, but it's also statistically overblown. Let's actually look at the historical data. Since 1950, the S&P 500 has had a negative year only 14 times out of 74 years. That's a 19% chance of a down year. And even in down years, the average loss is 11%. So, if your $15,000 drops by 11%, it's worth $13,350. You can still borrow $6,600 to $9,345 against that at 50 to 70% loan to value. That covers months of expenses. And here's the critical part. If you lose your job during a market crash, you're not the only one. Unemployment spikes during recessions. But historically, markets recover within 12 to 18 months, and the best buying opportunities are during crashes. If you stay invested and keep making contributions, even small ones, during the crash, you're buying shares at a discount. You're setting yourself up for massive gains during the recovery. The people who panic sell and pull everything into cash during a crash are the ones who lose. The people who stay invested and use credit for short-term liquidity are the ones who win. This is why the wealthy get richer during recessions. They don't hoard cash, they hoard assets. Let's also address the insurance gap, because this ties directly into the emergency fund trap. Most people are holding massive cash reserves because they're underinsured. If you don't have adequate health insurance, disability insurance, or renter's insurance, then yes, you're going to feel like you need $30,000 in cash because you're essentially self-insuring against catastrophe. But here's the math. Disability insurance costs about $50 to $150 per month and replaces 60% of your income if you can't work. That's $600 to $1,800 per year. A high-deductible health insurance plan with an HSA costs a bit more upfront, but it caps your out-of-pocket maximum at $7,000 to $9,000. If you're holding $25,000 in cash because you're afraid of medical bills, but you don't have proper insurance, you're doing it backwards. You should be paying $2,000 a year for insurance and investing the other $23,000. Insurance is leveraged protection. You pay small premiums to transfer catastrophic risk to a company with billions in reserves. Cash is unleveraged protection. You hold 100% of the risk yourself at 0% return. It's the least efficient form of protection possible. Here's where the emergency fund trap intersects with the lifestyle creep problem we talk about on this channel. People build a big emergency fund and then they feel rich. They feel like they have cushion, so they start spending more. They upgrade the apartment because, hey, I have $20,000 saved. I can afford an extra $200 a month in rent. They lease the nicer car because they have the safety net. The emergency fund becomes permission to inflate their lifestyle, which increases their monthly expenses, which means they need an even bigger emergency fund, which takes even longer to save, which delays investing even further. It's a doom loop. The emergency fund is supposed to give you freedom, but instead, it gives you an excuse to spend more, which creates more dependency on the emergency fund, which keeps you trapped in the cash hoarding cycle forever. You never escape. You just get better at being broke with a buffer. Now let's talk about the time cost, because this is the part that makes me genuinely furious. If you're 25 years old and you spend 3 years saving a $20,000 emergency fund before you start investing, you didn't just delay investing for 3 years. You destroyed the most powerful 3 years of compound growth in your entire life. Money invested at age 25 has 40 years to compound before retirement at 65. Money invested at age 28 has 37 years. That 3-year difference is not linear, it's exponential. A single dollar invested at age 25, earning 10% annually, becomes $45.26 at age 65. A dollar invested at age 28 becomes $33.83. You lost $11.43 per dollar, a 25% reduction in terminal value just by waiting 3 years. If you invest $10,000 at 25, it becomes $452,593 at 65. If you invest that same $10,000 at 28, it becomes $338,297. Waiting 3 years to build an emergency fund cost you $114,296 in retirement wealth. You were told this was being responsible. This is financial suicide. So, what's the actual solution? What's the smart way to handle emergency reserves without sacrificing decades of compound growth? Let me give you the 3-tier liquidity framework that balances protection with growth. This is how you escape the trap. Tier 1, the immediate buffer. This is $1,000 to $2,000 in a checking account for small, immediate expenses. The $400 car repair, the $150 emergency room copay, the $800 vet bill. This is your first line of defense, and it should be easily accessible. No questions asked. Tier 2, the short-term reserve. This is 1 month of essential expenses in a high-yield savings account. Not 6 months, 1 month. If your rent, utilities, and food cost $3,000, you keep $3,000 liquid. This covers the gap if your paycheck is delayed, if you have a temporary income disruption, or if you need to float expenses for a few weeks. This money earns 4 to 5% in a high-yield savings account, so it's not getting destroyed by inflation as badly. Tier 3, the invested reserve. Everything beyond tiers 1 and 2 goes into a taxable brokerage account invested in a diversified index fund. This is your long-term emergency fund, but it's working for you. It's compounding. It's growing. And if you have a true emergency that exceeds your $4,000 to $5,000 in tiers 1 and 2, you open a securities-backed line of credit and you borrow against this account. You don't sell, you borrow. You solve the emergency and then you pay back the line over 6 to 12 months while your investments stay in the market. This framework gives you liquidity, protection, and growth. You aren't sacrificing one for the other. You're optimizing all three. Let me give you a real-world example of how this plays out. Let's take Sarah. She's 29, makes $72,000 a year, and her monthly expenses are $3,800. Using the traditional emergency fund method, she'd need $22,800 saved in cash. But using the three-tier system, here's her setup. Tier 1, $1,500 in checking. Tier 2, $3,800 in a high-yield savings account at 4.5%. Tier 3, $17,500 in a brokerage account in VTSAX. She also opens a securities-backed line of credit with Fidelity for up to $12,250, which is 70% of her $17,500 brokerage balance. Total liquidity available, $5,300 in cash plus $12,250 in credit equals $17,550 of accessible funds. That's enough to cover 4.5 months of expenses without touching her investments. But here's the magic. Her $17,500 in the market earns 10% annually, growing to $45,382 over 10 years. If she had kept that $17,500 in savings at 0.5%, it would be worth $18,394 after 10 years. The three-tier system nets her $26,988 more over a decade. Same protection, triple the wealth. This isn't a hack. This is just understanding how money actually works. Now, I need to address the fear objection head on, because I know some of you are feeling it right now. You're thinking, this sounds too risky. I can't sleep at night if I don't have cash in the bank. And I get it, I really do. But here's what you need to understand. Risk and volatility are not the same thing. Volatility is the up and down movement of your account balance. Risk is the probability of permanent 9 loss. Cash feels safe because the number doesn't move, but cash has guaranteed permanent loss through inflation. Stocks feel risky because the number moves, but historically, over any 10-year period, the S&P 500 has had a 94% success rate of positive returns. The real risk is holding cash. The perceived risk is investing. Your brain has it backwards. And if you genuinely cannot sleep at night without $20,000 in cash, then you need to ask yourself why. What are you actually afraid of? Are you afraid of not being able to pay rent? Then 1 month of expenses and savings solves that. Are you afraid of job loss? Then disability insurance and a securities-backed line solve that. Are you afraid of medical bills? Then proper health insurance solves that. If you've addressed all the actual risks and you still feel like you need a huge cash pile, then the issue isn't financial, it's psychological. And you can't build wealth by catering to irrational fear. You have to train your brain to tolerate the discomfort of having your money work instead of sitting idle. Here's the final piece that ties this all together, and it's the most important concept in this entire video. Wealth is not built by saving. Wealth is built by deploying capital efficiently. Saving is important for short-term stability, but once you cross the threshold of basic liquidity, every additional dollar in savings is a dollar that's not building your future. The middle class saves. The wealthy deploy. The middle class hoards cash out of fear. The wealthy use credit to bridge gaps while keeping their capital invested. The middle class sees a $10,000 emergency fund as a finish line. The wealthy see $10,000 as a deployment opportunity, as seed capital for the next investment. You need to shift your identity from saver to investor. And that doesn't mean you become reckless. It means you become strategic. It means you understand that protection and growth are not opposites. They're complementary when you design your system correctly. Let me give you the actionable steps right now so you can start escaping the emergency fund trap this week. Step 1. Calculate your true emergency need. Take your essential monthly expenses, rent, utilities, food, insurance, and multiply by 1 month. That's your Tier 2 number. Add $1,500 for Tier 1. The total is your cash reserve target. For most people, this is $4,000 to $6,000, not $25,000. Step 2. Anything beyond that target gets moved into a taxable brokerage account and invested in a total market index fund like VTI or VTSAX. Set up automatic monthly contributions so you're not tempted to let it pile up in checking. Step 3. Open a securities-backed line of credit with your brokerage. You don't have to use it, it's just there. It's your insurance policy that costs you nothing until you need it. And when you need it, it costs you 5 to 8% interest temporarily, which is infinitely better than sacrificing 10% compound growth permanently. These 3 steps take maybe 2 hours to execute, and they will save you hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. I also want you to run your own numbers right now. Go look at your savings account balance. Write down the number. Now multiply that number by 0.10. That's how much that money would earn annually if it were invested in the S&P 500. Now multiply your savings balance by 0.03. That's how much purchasing power you're losing annually to inflation. Subtract the inflation loss from the potential investment gain. That difference is your annual wealth destruction rate. For every year you keep that money in cash, you're volunteering to lose that amount. You're not being safe. You're being systematically robbed by your own fear. Look, I'm not saying you should have zero cash. I'm not saying you should YOLO your entire paycheck into Tesla stock and hope for the best. What I'm saying is that the traditional emergency fund advice is a relic from a different economic era. And if you follow it blindly, you will spend your entire life building a pile of slowly evaporating cash, while the people who understand liquidity build empires. The emergency fund trap is designed to keep you comfortable with being broke. It gives you just enough stability that you don't panic, but not enough growth that you escape. It's the financial equivalent of a minimum security prison. You're fed, you're housed, but you're not free. And the only way to break out is to redefine what safety actually means. Safety is not a pile of cash. Safety is a diversified system of liquidity, insurance, and invested capital that works together to protect you while building your future. Stop hoarding. Start deploying. Stop saving for decades. Start investing from day one. The emergency fund is not the finish line. It's the trap that keeps you from ever reaching the starting line of wealth. If this video made you realize you've been sitting on a pile of melting ice while calling it security, share it with a friend who's got $30,000 in a checking account earning nothing. We need to stop letting fear-based advice destroy our futures. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. If you want to know why 2 incomes can't keep up with the cost of living anymore, click the left video. And if you want to know the work scam about why $30 per hour doesn't actually pay you $30, click the right video, and I'll see you there in a second.